Hi, this is Paul. I want to talk more about AA. Those of you who watched the members only videos from my trip back and forth to Santa Rosa got a lot of thoughts on that. I thought about maybe clipping some of that stuff out and putting it on the main channel, but then I didn't take the time to do it because I wanted to put the Sunday video on because I didn't get a rough draft in this weekend and I wanted to finish up the Northwestuary set of videos. So I got those both out here on Monday. It's Tuesday morning when this one will release. And I had a whole bunch of admin work to do as I've been gone from my office for a little while. So I did some of that this morning. And while I did that, I listened to the Not Estuary meeting that Tayo was leading. If you don't listen to the whole 2 hours and 4 minutes of their Not Estuary meeting on the Friday Morning Nameless channel, just listen to the introductions, because the introductions were stellar. Maybe if I get a little bit of time after I finish recording this, I'll just take all the introductions and append them to the end of this video to make it easy for you, because it was a really nice introduction into what's going on. Because what's going on is not immediately obvious. I just edited up a little bit the closing comments on the Northwestuary video, and it's such a leaky head. That's when you go back and watch the videos again, it's like, oh yeah, there was that. Oh, that was so good. Oh wow, he said that, she said that. That's so impactful. And you just these things. Life is just so rich. All these riches just go by. But each of the introductions were really powerful. Sherry decided to do something a little different with her introduction, and I thought it was really poignant in this. But the one I wanted to play right at the front was Buck's, because Buck has been around a long time, and Buck gave me that Jordan Peterson surfer thing. And what's so cool about the TLC is that sometimes people have been around for 6 or 7 years, and Buck was there right at the beginning of the channel. I've never had a Randos conversation with him. We've chatted on Twitter a little bit. And I never quite know. It's just the normal churn of things is that people watch for a little while and then they go away and then they watch some more. Someone just sent me the nicest comment on the Sunday sermon video. And Cassandra said something super nice in her introduction too. And but Buck was talking and doing his introduction, and it really gave me a sense for why am I doing all this AA thinking right now. Now part of it is of course how much Chad has colonized me and many of the rest of us. But I was telling my wife about this yesterday, and she was like, well, what does, because she's been to one estuary meeting here at church. And she's like, well, what does estuary have to do with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous? They seem so different. And so with all the driving that I was doing this weekend back and forth to Santa Rosa and listening to the writing of the big book, audiobook, and chewing on that a little bit, it just occurred to me how the sneaky secret of AA is very similar to the sneaky participation of estuary and sort of what we have going on in this strange little corner of the internet, where as I was thinking more and more about, okay, what is the power of AA? And I think the power of AA, I told my wife this because she talks about this sometimes with respect to her kids in school. Sometimes if she has maybe a smart kid who's unruly in class and they can't sit still and they're a little ahead of the class, give that kid the job of tutoring another kid. And suddenly, wow, that kid rises to the occasion, and that kid becomes the teacher, and that kid embodies all of the kinds of things that the teacher is so struggling to get that kid to embody. But once the kid sort of fulfills the role of the teacher, and once the drunk sort of fulfills the role of the sobriety mentor, the sponsor, of course, that's the AA language, then suddenly they rise to the occasion, and the ethos of this fills them up. And I mean, they maintain their sobriety not just because they are recipients of a program. And so much of what is wrong in our culture with respect to sort of the giver-givee dynamic that so often happens, where people get tired of being the the target of someone else's, world changing benevolence is well, why don't you get the chance to be the agent and to give the gift? And whereas, Protestant Reformation rightly might be charged with making people passive, listening to sermons, let's say, the Protestant Reformation also got a lot of people involved in doing ministry with the priesthood of all believers. And I think that was a really key element to a lot of the good stuff that happened in the Protestant Reformation. But I want to play Buck's intro here because this is the first time I've seen him on a video, and he was a delight. I'll put the link to the whole thing below, but when he was talking, I thought, oh yeah, this is why I'm trying to get my mind around what Alcoholics Anonymous is and what's been happening with it.
Let's go Buck next.
My name is Jim Buckowitz. People call me Jimmy Buck or just Buck. Buck's easier. Like I said before, I've been following Peterson and PVK since the first days. I think I watched, PVK's first video. He's from my neighborhood, kind of, sort of. He used to live as a kid. Went to school that my grandson went to. I'm a geezer. I'll be 70 in a couple of months. But I love to be on the edge like this, in the middle of this. I'm in recovery for 25 years, one day at a time. I chair and lead Christian 12-step groups and part of a...
Now, just a little, they said there wouldn't be math, but there is a little math. 25 years, he's 70. So we'll do the math. 45. What does that mean? He got sober at 45. That means that he probably had 30 years, 20 years, between 20 and 30 years of drinking and having alcohol wreak havoc in his life. What part of what's so interesting about doing all this thinking about AA is, again, going back into the 1930s and after Prohibition. Prohibition, of course, was supposed to cure alcoholism in America, and it gives you a little bit of indication about the limits of what legislation can do. Anyway.
Part of a men's group and stuff like that. And I just see so much AA stuff in this little corner. It's crazy. So I've been wanting to dive in forever. Great to meet you all finally in interactive space.
Oh, thank you, Buck. I think you're the only fresh face in this group.
No, Cassandra said it's her first too, right?
Yes, but Cassandra is notorious in the hive mind.
Okay.
She's non-contact, and she can also be seen Thursday along with Michael at the Bible study.
Cool.
So I just want to spend a little bit more time on your story, Buck.
Sure.
How long have you been in the TLC, lurking or watching?
Since 2017 or whenever PVK posted his first stuff. It was so random that, because as soon as I saw Peterson, I was like, what's going on here? And PVK started doing analysis of everything he was saying. And I thought, wow, this guy can see exactly what I'm seeing. And Peterson had such a strong AA angle. Peterson introduced me to McGilchrist and Vervaeke and Pajot and the whole gang, So I've just been incorporating all that stuff in my recovery life and whatever I could share. What else? If I have any connection at all to the group, I did a picture. I'm an artist and illustrator. I did a picture of Peterson standing on a surfboard with a giant wave behind him when he was in the first wave of his stuff, and PVK used it on one of his videos. So
okay, so your face might not have been seen, but your work has been experienced by the TLC.
Possibly. Pity you all.
I'm very glad to meet you, Buck, and I'm glad you're...
You too, Teo.
Cassandra.
Cassandra's intro is excellent too. So here's the illustration that he did, and he sent it to me, and I that was before the really fancy suits came out. But it was, and we were talking about sort of the Peterson waves that were coming through. So while I'm listening to Writing the Big Book, I'm also listening to the Big Book. And it was very interesting, the foreword to the fourth. I only have the third edition here because, again, I got that from my friend who was a longtime AAer. And when he passed, his wife didn't know what to do with his books because she wasn't interested in his books. So she gave me all his books. And I had to sort of sort through them. He was like I said before about my friend, he gave up drinking, being an alcoholic, but he collected other things after he achieved sobriety, and one of them was books, and so I had a fair amount of books to go through. But the intro of the different, well, maybe I'll just cover it. And before I get there, one of the commenters helped me remember exactly where it was that I heard Tom Hanks talking about the story of AA. And I thought, did Peterson talk to Hanks? I don't think Peterson talked to Hanks. Who did Peterson talk to? Peterson talked to the rest is history guys.
What about because I know you do, production as well. If you went to some, big studio or whatever, and they said, listen, Tom, we want a historical epic, but the subject of your choice. And since you've done a lot to do with the Second World War, I'm going to ban
Masters
you.
of the Air presumably is that.
Well,
right?
I was about to say, I'm going to ban you from a Second World War or a World War themed choice. So you have to go back a bit further
or
in
a
history.
space themed.
What are you going to choose?
All right. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Maybe like yourselves. I know a number of people who, men and women of all ages, some of them are peers and some of them, whose lives were completely changed for the better over a long, difficult struggle by, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Wow.
The advent of what I know of as there was a very great TV movie that had James Woods and James Garner of it, and this is one of the places where we started getting interested in it. These guys came up with this thing called a 12-step program that just kept each other from drinking themselves into an alcoholic stupor. And that was in the 1930s, 1940s, and it really came about in the 1950s. Now, no one makes money off of my understanding of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program. But if you were going to say, has there been a life-altering movement that has really changed, in some ways, the world's for the better, by way of defining and enlightening people in the realm of human behavior? I'd say Alcoholics Anonymous has, and I think it's a fascinating story that has. And I haven't read a lot about it, but there's a number of things like the history of that organization. It's about as vibrant and as vivid as any that you're going to come across. And the funny thing is, there are how many millions of members of Alcoholics Anonymous are there out there? And the most you can get out of any of this, well, how does it work? And they'll all say, well, quite nicely, thank you. That's all you're going to get out of it. So that would be something that if someone wanted to throw down and say let's examine that.
Right. You heard it here
let's
first.
say they're listening.
Yeah, of course they're listening. So
that's stuck in my head. That was one of these little moments that colonized me. So this is the what edition do I have? Oh, come on. First and second edition. Oh, I got the Kindle book. I'll have to work on this. So they had the forward to the first edition, and it was so interesting, these forwards, and the forward to the second edition. Since the original forward to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle is taking place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at its destiny. Already, continues the early text, 2s and 3s and 5s of us have sprung up into other communities. And then 16 years have lapsed between our first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6 6,000 groups whose membership is far above 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups have been found in each of the United States and all the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and U.S. possessions. Some are now taking shape in Asia, many of our friends encouraging us by saying that this is the beginning. This is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. And then the next, well, I've got the third edition. Don't let the dog treat spill. I've got the dog again. So here's the third edition. Preface. This is the third edition of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. The first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The second edition was published in 1955, and it reached a total of more than 1,150,000 copies. Because this book has become the basic text of our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholics, men and women, recover. And then they go through, and as for the third edition, by March 1976, when this edition went to the publisher, a total worldwide membership of Alcoholics Anonymous was conservatively estimated at more than 1 million, with almost 28,000 groups meeting in over 90 countries. Now, it's a remarkable thing, given how lightweight the thing is, and that's part of its key. There's a great moment in the writing of the big book when they're meeting. They've got an in with the Rockefellers. Now, this is some of the history that I've been digging into, because you have to realize that all of this founding of AA comes on the heels of the failure of Prohibition. That's absolutely key in this. And it's very difficult for many people today to imagine what being a drunk was socially in the 1930s, given everything that had happened with Prohibition, the failure of Prohibition to basically resolve. But of course, Prohibition was on the heels of the temperance movement, abolitionism, child labor laws, women's suffrage. All of these movements were part of the 19th century progressive movement, which was a really important movement. And these were all on the heels of the Second Great Awakening and everything that sort of poured out. So I'm doing a little bit of rummaging around in that history right now, trying to get my bearings on just a better vision of what this was like for people. Well, anyway, so as I mentioned in a previous video, the founders of AA you have the Oxford groups, which were also groups about keeping things light and simple. But then Bill Wilson said, okay, we need paid missionaries. We need special hospitals that are AA hospitals. They didn't have AA, they didn't have language yet. They had the Cure. And then we need a book. And of course, all that really came out of it was the book. As it turns out, the book was enough. And as it turns out, the book is just full of stories. We have all this talk in the corner about stories and stories and stories and stories. But we're always a little foggy on exactly how do these stories work and why do they work and what's the deal with these stories? Well, they actually work well enough to help people get sober and to inspire people to want to be healers of others. And what's fascinating is they had this in with the Rockefellers. And so they're all excited because they think that the Rockefellers had a huge history of, they were Baptist teetotalers, the Rockefellers were, and they had poured tons of political money into the temperance movement, into Prohibition, into what then was sort of Northern Baptist Protestantism, of course, Riverside Cathedral. A lot of that waspy Protestantism, again, would sort of become, that would be the main line, and then we all know how that would go. And so they thought, wow, the Rockefellers will be down with this. And unlike just about everyone else, because everyone else was seeing these drunks who maybe had months or a couple of years of sobriety, and people are more than a little suspicious of, yeah, if we give you all this money, are you just going to drink it away? I mean, giving you this money might make things worse. And then what the Rockefellers are thinking, well, these people can finance the hospitals and finance the missionaries. And again, they're all thinking this is the fast solution because after all, there's millions of drunks all over the world that need rescue from alcohol. Well, there's a minister who was close friends with Junior Rockefeller, the second generation, who was basically writing all of his benevolence checks for him and telling him where to send his money. And he welcomed them with great excitement and really appreciated it. And then he sent them a letter that, well, I should just find the letter. So they first got a letter that basically the word of the letter was, money will spoil this thing. But don't worry about that. Let's have the meeting. We'll sell it, because Bill Wilson and others of them, these were basically business people. And they're like, well, once we get him in the room, we'll sell it. If the men's personal stories had not been enough, these statements from an outstanding psychiatrist and a leading authority on the treatment of alcoholism, Amos reported, made a profound impact upon the non-alcoholics present. Following Dr. Silkworth's testimony, Albert Scott, visibly moved, looked inquiringly at the table and asked, so gentlemen, what can we do to help you? This is exactly the question that Bill Wilson had been waiting all night. And he immediately launched into his speech, describing the deadly slowness, because of course, drunks are dying all around the world. And he's right, they are. Deadly slowness with which these groups have been growing and pleading for his plans to accelerate the spread of their recovery methods. What they needed, he said, were alcoholic hospitals whose profits would fund the equally necessary paid missionaries, while supporting the creation of a book to explain their methods. Again, explain their methods. The stories were better than the explanations. What they needed to accomplish all of this, he noted, would cost money. Actually, it was going to take quite a lot of money, although he never specified an amount. As he finished his presentation, Bill noted in closing that you must all realize that the need here is desperately urgent. We are fully aware that there are risks in the ambitious plans I have just outlined, but the risk and the consequences of doing nothing at all would certainly be greater. Following the summation, Bill says that all the alcoholics, including Dr. Bob and both alcoholic doctors, chimed in with their agreement on each of these important points. The room grew quiet as everyone around the table considered what had just been said. Finally, Albert Scott broke the silence. Gentlemen, I am deeply moved by what I have heard. What you have described is nothing less than first century Christianity in its most beautiful form. How, again, I mentioned this in the past videos, Dr. Bilizikian mentoring aspirational young Christian Reformed Bill Hybels as he wants to bring the first century gospel. And so Willow Creek comes, and someone might say, that doesn't look like first century gospel. We've got all of these different images of relevance realization about how to recapture the genuine article. And of course, this is sort of it's kind of the promotion that the Orthodox, we really have first century stuff going here. It's like, well, maybe 5th century. And of course, Protestants are all trying this new stuff of various sects and heretical groups and good groups too. I mean, everybody's trying to get back to the 1st century. Up to this point, your work has been one of tremendous goodwill only, with one person carrying the message to another. And again, part of the key here is that it's actually the carrying of the message that is doing the work here, as much as being the recipient of the message. Because one of the things you learn in church so often is that if you really want someone to grow, make them a teacher, let's say a small group or a Sunday school class or something, because once they become the teacher, well, now suddenly they're the autodidact. They're going to be sitting in front of this group of adults or children, and they're going to be staring back at them, and they don't want to let them down, so they rise to the occasion and they do their homework, and most of them at least. I'm truly afraid that the introduction of money in hospitals and paid field workers will dramatically change all of that. We should be very careful not to do anything that would create a professional or a propertied class within your society. Everyone here wants to do everything we can to help you. It is the reason we all came out tonight. But would it really be wise to spoil this great work of yours with money? I am very concerned that going down that road will do nothing but quickly destroy everything you have already accomplished. This line of argument was, of course, very familiar to Bill and his group. These were the Acton objections all over again. Bill Wilson had gone down to Acton, Ohio, presented all of this, how they wanted the hospitals, and he really worked hard to get the group to agree, but their hearts weren't in it. Now, again, eventually a book would be a really helpful thing, but you just got to be careful with how you put these things together. And the truth is, there are many recovery hospitals, all the Betty Ford Clinic, of course, one of the big ones, and there's ones at every level. And so actually, and a lot of these use 12-step methodologies and all of this. So money isn't the enemy, but it's how you go about scaling this. And there's so much more subtlety about it. And so that would then, of course, get them into it. But the story is the story. So what I found, and I was listening to Writing of the Big Book, and it's like, boy, I'd better listen to the Big Book too. And so I started listening to Bill's story. Wow, what a story. What a story. And I agree with Tom Hanks.
Chapter 1. Bill's Story. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we knew young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned. And we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was...
Remember, this is the First World War. This is Tolkien's war. This is Lewis's war. The predecessor to the current meaning crisis, or maybe just the continuation, or maybe just a really strong side of it, happened in the destruction of modernity that Europe created on the battlefields and in the trenches of the First World War.
Love, applause, war. Moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last. And in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time, we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. 22, and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? My talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises which I would manage with the utmost assurance. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company. The drive for...
Now, a couple of things. If you read... Well, let me find the book first. Laura Hildebrand's Unbroken. Amazing story. And so here you have, let me get his first name right. Louis Zamperini? It's a great story. Much better than the movie. Zamperini, there it is. Louis Zamperini. Astounding story. He goes to the Second World War and gets shot out of the sky, sets the record for life in a raft at sea, gets rescued by the Japanese, gets sent to the worst POW camp in Japan with the most sadistic commander who makes it his business to mete out all sorts of torture on him. Finally, comes home from that, goes to New York City, and marries the girl of his dreams, gets a job. Everything is going great. The skies couldn't beat him. The oceans couldn't beat him. Japanese POW camp couldn't beat him. What beat him? Alcohol. And of course, what we know about trauma today, it's like, yeah, you have all of that trauma, and the body keeps the score. I remember reading that book, and he said basically, for a lot of human history, especially in Northern Europe, we just basically treated trauma with alcohol. And that's a unbroken, great book. Really enjoyed it. So back to Bill.
For success was on. I'd prove to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements. But my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle. The sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service.
Now, it's fun in the writing of the big book. The writing of the big book does a sort of just the facts approach to a lot of what's in the big book. And basically, on many accounts, says, yeah, these stories are a little bit polished. They're a little bit framed. They're a little bit, yeah, they are. Are they untrue? This is where you get into the Peterson-Dawkins thing. And so in the writing of the big book, they sort of go through it. But it's also interesting how much, when I listen to this, I think about the kinds of testimonies that you might hear in church. And that isn't really a question of, let's say, AA and church. It's more a question of the culture of the time. I'll jump ahead a little bit. The link to the whole thing is below.
My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew, and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes.
Now, listen to what he just said there through the lens of the meaning crisis. I mean, that is what people are seeking. I mean, the meaning is a powerful thing.
Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work.
I remember one of the homeless guys I knew fairly well, the one that would sleep against my door. I remember he came in one day and basically he said, this is a guy who had he had been married to a wife, 4 children, had a job as a drug and alcohol counselor. He is a very interesting guy. He's still alive right now. He's not homeless at the moment, which is good. But he told me, he said, my greatest fear is to wake up sober. My greatest fear is to wake up sober. I mean, he always made sure he had a beer. If he'd get harder stuff, that would kind of, because it was bipolar and he'd be in a rapid cycle. And so the beer sort of he was, of course, self-medicating. And he would, again and again and again, he would lecture me about other people abuse. I use it. I says, oh, okay. How's that going for you? And then one day I'm driving him to the mental hospital because he's fit. I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live anymore. I heard that so much. I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to be me, but I can't not be me. So I'm driving him to the mental hospital. Why is it always you driving me to the hospital? Why is it never me driving you? Well, because by your own admission, you gave up trying to have a driver's license after your 11th DUI. You're living paycheck to paycheck on your Social Security by being outside. You're living outside my door. It doesn't seem hard to figure out why it's always me driving you to the hospital and not the other way around.
I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. "Come, what's all this about?" I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply but smilingly, he said, "I've got religion." I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how 2 men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat, on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the spheres really had their music. But his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. With ministers and the world's religions...
Just a little aside. Algo's been serving me up because I've been watching more of them. Mark Vernon had a nice video today with Rupert Sheldrake.
Hello, Mark.
Hi there, Rupert. I thought today we might talk about purpose. And this has come up for me recently because I've been really enjoying Brian Cox's new series on the BBC about the solar system. You know, one of these extraordinarily beautiful, wonderfully filmed and presented science programs with all these images from probes, from the planets, from the moon.
Everybody has their little iconostasis that they put in their videos. Here, we're going to talk about animals, but let's show you pretty pictures while our words sort of colonize you. But Mark noted something else. And this is very much along the line of what Sam Tiedemann and John Vervaeke were talking about a year or so ago.
Moons around planets. And there's music, and Brian Cox gets flown to these extraordinarily beautiful parts of the world in order to explain the physics against wonderful backdrops of glaciers and mountains and deserts and so on. And I love them. But one of the things that it really strikes me about them is how purpose sort of is flirted with throughout these programs. In one moment, we're being told there's absolutely no purpose in nature. It's all laws, it's all causes. These enormously beautiful mountain ranges or glaciers and so on are just the product of gravity and thermodynamics. But then in the next moment, I mean, actually, in one or two of the programs, Brian Cox even said, nature's imagination is greater than the human imagination. And then he also said something like, maybe in other solar systems on other worlds, nature is tinkering to produce even more beauty. What would that be like? So this kind of sense that imagination, nature, has a kind of aesthetic purpose, at the very least, kind of comes in and then it disappears again. And I guess that this shadowy presence of purpose in modern scientific accounts of things is a modern phenomenon. And it's almost as if, although purpose has been sort of formally pushed to one side in terms of explaining things, it never quite dies. It keeps rearing its head, even when describing the physical world, where you'd think it might be relatively straightforward to shunt purpose off the stage. So anyway, I thought we could talk about purpose and track something of what's happened and what is the role of purpose in nature.
And Sheldrake talks about how in the 17th century this was a major thing to do. And it was just interesting, again, while the 1930s prose is very 1930s, but how perennial many of these issues, as they wrestle with their meaning crisis and the symptoms of it, are to today's conversation.
As I parted right there. Could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ, I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible, the brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right, after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" That statement hit me hard.
Again, I heard this.
And I'm expanding this into a book, but yes, there's a very personal story. I don't know to what extent it's useful, but on a very personal level, I went through a period of crisis, very personal crisis of fear, anxiety, depression. I went to the best therapists money can pay. I think they gave me an explanation of some of the things that I was struggling with, but I continued to have this big spiritual hole or need, as you call it. I tried to self-medicate. I tried to sedate myself. I drank enough alcohol you could use to sterilize a hospital. It would not, nothing helped. I continued to read, books on psychiatry and the brain, and none of that helped. All of that explained a small piece of the puzzle, but there was still something that I was missing. And then I think it was one therapist who said to me early this year, "I think, Ayan, you're spiritually bankrupt." And at that point, I was in a place where I had sort of given up hope. I was in this place of darkness, and I thought, well, what the hell? I'm going to open myself to that and see, asked her, "What are you talking about?" And we started talking about faith and a belief in God, and I explained to her that the God I grew up with was a horror show. He created you to punish you and frightened you, and as a girl and as a woman, you're just a piece of trash. And so I said to her, I explained to her why I didn't believe in God, and more than that, why I actually hated God. And then she asked me to design my own God, and she said, if you had the power to, attribute a higher power, if you had the power to make your own God, what would you do? And as I was going on, I thought, yeah, right. That's actually a description of Jesus Christ and Christianity at its best. And so instead of inventing yet another new God, I started diving into that story. And so far, my husband and I went about, both of us saying we're atheists, and now I like this story. I explore it, and the more I look at it, the more, I don't want to say I'm fulfilled, but I feel I no longer have this need, this void, I have to say, and I feel like I'm going somewhere. There are standards that I have to live by that are quite high, and that's daunting. But these are standards that I'd rather aspire to and fail. Maybe the only human being who nearly achieved that was the late Queen Elizabeth.
It melted the icy intellectual. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my requests bore upon my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements.
Now, one of the things that isn't mentioned here, but that I began to bump into, is this, what was called the white light, the white light experience. And so these AIs are a fallible but useful search engine. Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, had a transformative white light experience in December 1934 while he was being treated for alcoholism at the Towns Hospital in New York City. This experience played a significant role in the founding principles of AA. In a moment of profound despair, Wilson cried out to God for help. As he felt completely defeated by his alcoholism, he described what happened as an intense mystical experience. Suddenly, he felt a powerful sensation of warmth and light enveloping him. In his own words, he described it as a white light filled with a sense of peace. This feeling of divine presence convinced him that the higher power was at work. The overwhelming sensation led to a feeling of serenity and a belief that he had been freed from the desire to drink. After this experience, Wilson never drank again. He went on to develop the 12-step program. Now, recently, Justin Briley has yet another conversation with Alex O'Connor, and I made a joking comment that maybe because the cost of housing is so high in the UK that Alex is just couch surfing on Justin's sofa, and that's why Justin gets all these conversations with Alex. And they're every single one of them is a great conversation. And Justin is absolutely one of my favorite interviewers, and he does a tremendous job on this one. And then he comes to this point with Alex.
You don't believe in God, as you made clear at the beginning of the interview. As you have, though, obviously engaged at a far deeper level, you did a whole theology and philosophy degree. You've taken a lot of time to look into these things. You've lived with Christians. You've really tried to understand and engage and see whether this could be true. Has the dial moved at all, even if it's even just in terms of, I don't think it's quite as unlikely as I used to think that God exists. Has there been any movement whatsoever on your?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because it's difficult to remember exactly where my mind was, at any particular point in the past. There's this opening statement to a debate with Jonathan McLatchie, which I re-uploaded as a standalone video called "This Is Why I Don't Believe in God." And in the center, I talk about the fact that I've tried all of these things, that I've got my degree, that I live with Christians, that I did all kinds of things, and then I say that there was nothing. That absolutely nothing.
Calvinism confirmed. You can't get yourself there. Maybe he's reprobate, but he's still young. We'll see.
Experienced nothing after all of this effort that speaks to the existence of the God in the universe. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is true in a sense and not in another. Experientially, which is kind of, I'm talking about the problem of divine hiddenness in that particular speech. And have I ever experienced something that speaks to God's existence? I can't honestly say that I have. I've had weird experiences and, moments that every human has, moments that they can't quite describe. But I wasn't like, oh, this has to be God.
The light bulb didn't come on.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I remember thinking when sometimes if I'm I'm in a sort of half dreaming state and I feel something weird and I think to myself, oh, was that something a bit religious? There's a sense in which that kind of speaks to the existence of God. I'm considering it. So I was a little bit like, is it true? Nothing. In terms of the experience, I think probably. But in terms of arguments, I think that the arguments, I consider them more tenable now than I did before. And I think that they are that there are more of them that are essentially successful at moving the dial. And so in the intellectual space, I think I take religion or theism, I should say, much more seriously than I did before. Still not convinced, but I would say that the dial has moved in that sense, that I take it much more seriously and think that there's some good arguments in favor of that. So in that clip where I say nothing,
Nothing. Not once, not nearly, not ever, not even briefly have I experienced anything that speaks to the existence of a God in the universe.
I'm talking experientially there. In terms of argument, I think it's a slightly different story.
Do you feel like it would be an experience that would have to be there? Yeah. Because when I asked Douglas Murray this question, he said, I'd have to hear a voice.
Yeah, it'd have to be something like that, I think. I'm not sure what it would be, but something like that.
Now, I have a friend who lives in northern England who I knew from the Dominican Republic, and he's a wonderful man. He's actually done some really accomplished things in the UK. He wasn't a Christian. His girlfriend was. Girlfriend he eventually married, and he told me the story once of God just coming upon him. And it was remarkably like what Karen Wong talked about at Northwestuary.
I haven't seen any fairies, although I would love to. When I was a little girl, I used to take acorn caps and fill them with honey and put them in a little shell and put them out under the trees for the fairies to eat. But I have had 4 or 5 experiences in my life, and it seemed like they always came at times that I was in need of deep healing without even really knowing sometimes that I was in need of deep healing, or I was right in the midst of some catastrophic circumstance. And in those times, one time it was before I became a Christian, and the other times were after I had calling out in prayer, crying out in prayer, and I don't know how to describe it. Maybe some of you have experienced it. It happened one time when I was in worship singing Victory in Jesus. in a little country church. I don't know if you've, this sounds weird and gross, but you know those pictures they show of people standing there and this light is pushing out of them like that? You've seen that, right? This was like the light was pouring into me, but I couldn't see the light, but I could feel the light pouring into me, and it was so powerful. It was like an orgasmic experience, but not sexually orgasmic, all through my heart and body and arms and fingertips and my head and everything. It was just this penetrating, powerful washing over of love and healing and measurement and judgment and reorienting and joy all at once. And I don't know how else, I mean, I don't honestly know how to put it into words, but it's only happened 3 or 4 times. I learned not to expect it or look for it, because why chase that, you know? That's his, when he wants to give that gift, he will give that gift. So that's my story.
I've heard many people with that story. And yet, many people who are Christians, sincere, wonderful, lovely Christians, have never had that story. And I'm sure people can find versions of that story out there in the world in other ways. But there's no point in just sharing the story. And God does what he wants. He's free to do as he pleases. That's what you get if you're God. And if you're at his mercy, you'd better hope that he's good. So in many ways, many of the themes that I've sort of been rolling around in the last few videos, and those of you who've watched my videos over the years know that these themes sort of roll in and roll out, and sometimes they come back up again, and sometimes they go away. And but just the thinking about, okay, what's going on here? It's not as new as we think it is. It definitely has historical roots. It's a paring down. And then there's this dynamic where it has to be general enough that we can, that mass numbers of people can approach it. But then as it gets into us specifically, it can't just stay general, because that's not the way people are. I am sitting at if I were to take out my phone, there is a GPS coordinate for exactly where I am. And there's a moment exactly where I am. And there are cells, and I have air molecules are going in and out of my body, and they're all specific and different, but yet the same. And so back and forth and back and forth. And so even though I love, let me see if I can find this quote. Chad, of course, put me onto this quote. Who then made all this? There is a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside the prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. Now, it's interesting, let's say in Alex O'Connor's case, I love a line from Eugene Peterson, who passed away. All you need is need. Now, again, that is so tricky, and I got to be so careful with this. And as a pastor, I know, because you sit across from people that they have all the need, and it has not rushed in to help them. And I sit and struggle with them. It was one estuary meeting I did in my first tour in the UK. It was the estuary meeting that we did for this lovely little church. I spoke at the church, and then we had a little estuary meeting that afternoon in a little office that the church had off-site. And I said, the difficulty with miracle stories is not that they happen. And to me, this foregone conclusion that miracles don't happen is one of the stupidest ideas I've ever heard. It's just sort of like, yeah, people can't fly. Everybody knows that. And it's like, have you ever been to an airport? Oh, yeah. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's there. It isn't there. And just because you have, if you're an ardent literalist, you're bound by your own non-religion about what can and cannot happen. Good luck to you. But the hardest thing is not that miracles happen. The hardest thing is when you see something or someone in a situation, you think they are as deserving as any, and the miracle doesn't happen. But of course, we know that in Christianity, because if anyone is worthy of deliverance from a cruel cross, it was the Son of Man, and he was not delivered. We find that as soon as we are able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commence to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. And now again, I want to say this because I know a bunch of fellow confessionalists, I myself am a confessionalist, a bunch of fellow confessionalists will rush in and yell about the particularities. And I agree with you, there must be particularities, and the particularities are not incidental or accidental or unimportant, but I think AA has this right, and we'll get to that great quote in a minute. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to possess a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. That is so critical. I dealt with Solomon in the sermon on Sunday, and the amazing thing about the God of the Bible is, on one hand, he can be, and Tim Keller used to get this so right, he can be so amazingly gracious to forgive and accept people that we look at and say they deserve no forgiveness and acceptance. But he can also be so outrageously demanding that you would read a text like the Sermon on the Mount. That is right. It's these incongruous excellencies. They don't seem to be able to fit together, but of course, I think, again, Tim Keller said that very well in one of his books. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad and roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. To those who earnestly seek, ask and you will find. Seek and you will find. Ask and you'll be given. Knock and the door will be open. But again, I fully know some of you out there are angry and you're screaming and you're throwing things and you're saying, I have asked and he didn't open. And I get it. I get it. Father, if there be another way. And just read James Scott's biography of Mother Teresa. This woman who pours out her life, feels completely rejected and abandoned by God. I get it. Can I answer it? No. Do I have a battering ram that will break open God's door? Don't play with him in those ways. You are way outclassed. Yet, sometimes that's exactly what he invites us to do. Keep at him. Break it down. Parable of the unrelenting widow who won't give even an unjust judge a break. And one of my favorite parables in Luke 16 of the dishonest steward. Read Kenneth Bailey on that. And I know I've talked about that before, and some of you really hate it, but there it is. All right. I think that's the end of this video. Leave a comment.
With Noah and then go around.
Cool. I'm Noah. I go by President Foxman online. And I'm here because Chad invited me. And I've been making videos kind of corner adjacent for a little bit. But they tend to be more video game oriented.
Let's go Buck next.
My name is Jim Buckowitz. People call me Jimmy Buck or just Buck. Buck's easier. Like I said before, I've been following Peterson and PVK since the first days. I think I watched, PVK's first video. He's from my neighborhood, kind of, sort of. He used to live as a kid. Went to school that my grandson went to. I'm a geezer. I'll be 70 in a couple of months. But I love to be on the edge like this, in the middle of this. I'm in recovery for 25 years, one day at a time. I chair and lead Christian 12-step groups and part of a men's group and stuff like that. And I just see so much AA stuff in this little corner. It's crazy. So I've been wanting to dive in forever. Great to meet you all finally in interactive space.
Thank you, Buck. I think you're the only fresh face in this group.
No, Cassandra said it's her first too, right?
Yes, but Cassandra is notorious in the hive mind.
Okay.
She's non-contact, and she can also be seen Thursday along with Michael at the Bible study.
Cool.
So I just want to spend a little bit more time on your story, Buck.
Sure.
How long have you been in the TLC, lurking or watching?
Since 2017 or whenever PVK posted his first stuff. It was so random that because as soon as I saw Peterson, I was like, what's going on here? And PVK started doing an analysis of everything he was saying. And I thought, wow, this guy can see exactly what I'm seeing. And Peterson had such a strong AA angle. Peterson introduced me to McGilchrist and Vervaeke and Pajot and the whole gang, So I've just been incorporating all that stuff in my recovery life and whatever I could share. What else? If I have any connection at all to the group, I did a picture. I'm an artist and illustrator. I did a picture of Peterson standing on a surfboard with a giant wave behind him when he was in the first wave of his stuff, and PVK used it on one of his videos. So
okay, so your face might not have been seen, but your work has been experienced by the TLC.
Possibly. I pity
Well,
you all.
I'm very glad to meet you, Buck, and I'm glad you're
You too, Teo.
Cassandra, a little bit about yourself and how you ended up here.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Cassandra, just Cassandra everywhere. Professional stream commenter, I guess. This is my first estuary, and I just wanted to experience it because I'm in Northern California, so it's pretty isolated up here. And when I looked on the map, there's like nothing in the whole, anything above Sacramento is just empty. So yeah, I just wanted to experience it, see it, and then I don't know, maybe that'll grow into something more here where I am. I started watching Jordan when everybody else did, but I didn't watch my first Paul video until late in 2020. I'd kind of seen his face around, but I was like, I don't know who this guy is. So I just kind of ignored him, but he kept popping up. and then 2 years after that, I started watching all the adjacent channels around and everything. And then maybe about a year or so ago, I started actually, talking in the comments and participating slightly more than just anonymously watching. But yeah, it's been great. I love it. I love the corner.
What's kept you engaged in the corner? Just really quickly.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe sometimes I'll get hyper fixated on some things. Like when I first started watching Paul's channel, I really watched nothing but Paul's videos on YouTube. Literally anytime it was YouTube, it was his video, his sermons. I was really into that. I guess because I also didn't have anyone who really knew who Jordan was. Or if they did, they didn't like him. Mm. So yeah, it's just an interesting space to get into and be like, okay, we're taking these things seriously. Because sometimes it seems like maybe the stuff Peterson was saying wasn't being taken seriously. enough in the way it should have been. And then yeah, I just started exploring all of these little other channels because they all had their niches. And I guess, I mean, if you're really into getting locked in on something tiny, this is like a great place to do it, because every channel's like a new little sphere, a new little world, kind of just marbles bouncing into each other or something like that. And so I guess that's like a big part of it. And then I think it's also fun because the channels have people's faces on them, so it's fun that you actually know people. Because like with other YouTubers, because the experience of like following a YouTuber, it really is just like, oh my gosh, I love you so much, you saved me. Like those are the comments you see in every YouTuber's streams and stuff. But it's also fun when you get more of a reciprocation, which you can't get with, you know, these other high level YouTubers that have been doing it since it first dropped.
Well,
So, yeah.
Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you for sharing a little bit of your story and how you got there. Christian Baxter, the TLC Joe Rogan, as I keep trying to find him.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Christian. I got here, same pipeline that's been mentioned. I think like when Peterson was sick, those 2.5 years or so, I probably, because I'd watched quite a bit of Paul before that, I probably trailed off. I was watching like finance videos on YouTube and stuff. I'm starting a new job. And then, yeah, I kind of got back in, and the last three or so years, and kind of, I didn't know that there was a kind of a subculture around Paul Vanderklay that had developed. I'd watched I was like Buck, I'd watched some of his very, very first Peterson response videos. Fascinated because he was a Christian pastor doing that, and I was a Christian who used to be a pastor, and it was interesting. So I had this urge back at the beginning of the year to try to get into a conversation about all the things and the players that had been also mentioned, Pajot, Vervaeke, and whatnot. And I just turned on the camera, and I didn't know. And there was like 50 comments because I said I'd heard Pajot and Vervaeke say this little corner of the internet. So I just was like thinking, hey, this is like very kind of top level. And so when I titled my thumb, it was based off of that. And then there was like 50 comments overnight, and I was like, what is... And then Chad's like, hey, I'll talk to you. So I went on and talked to him. I was like, hey, I want to play this game. And so I've been playing the game, the kind of the YouTube game with it, and meeting people and learning a ton about what is kind of, I think, truly happening here, more than just kind of like related to the AA and to conversation and to Cassandra's point about relationality in this digital space as opposed to consumption or and Grimm's breaking the fourth wall. So,
well, Bax, thank you for joining in and playing, and I think you've been playing the game as well as anyone else that's joined in recently. So thank you.
Amen.
Michael, can we get a little bit of your story, please?
Well, yeah, like everybody else, Peterson, and then I actually started. I was reading Francis Schaeffer's books, and he was talking about a lot of the same things Peterson was. So I typed in that search, Jordan Peterson, Francis Schaeffer, which got me the conversation between Paul and Burn Power. So I started off with watching Burn just because he had less videos overall. I was like, oh, how the heck am I ever going to catch up with this guy with his massive number of videos? But, I got into the thing eventually. Eventually, what I saw was how Paul was kind of doing this thing of kind of showing behind the scenes, like with the Randos conversations and everything, and letting people kind of see the way that we used to do things in privately, but a lot of the relational aspects that we've kind of forgotten how. And so I just kind of saw like the point was to get involved in doing your own thing, even if you don't do it perfect. You know, you're showing people the rough edges, and it kind of helps them get a more accurate picture of what's really going on compared to the polished stuff. So now I'm trying to get famous on the internet, but poorly. But yeah, so so that's what I'm here for.
Well, we're glad you're here, Michael. Clara, a little bit
Hi.
about your story and why and how you got your here.
I'm here a little bit different from other folks. I was in a coffee shop where I was a regular for a few years, and I was talking to a friend, and they kept telling me day after day after day, you've got to look up this Jordan Peterson guy. You've got to look at this John Vervaeke. You've got to look at this community on the internet where people talk about this stuff. And I said, no, there's no way. I don't have time in my life for you two. And here I am. I've been talking to some of you all for a few months now, trying to get to the bottom of it, and really realizing that there's a lot of things that I had never thought about or taken seriously before. To take them serious. I mean, this has really been a gift. Really expanded sort of the way that I've been thinking, the way that I think a lot of people in my zone think. So it's been really cool, really invigorating, or really something new and exciting for me. And I've totally lost my train of thought, but there's just a little bit about me there.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Clara. You were breaking up a little bit at the start. Just to fill the audience in, she was mentioning that she was spending time at a coffee shop where she met Sourdough Neil.
Mhm.
And for more of that story, I would recommend go down the video list on the Friday Morning Name list and check out some of the randos. Sherry, a little bit about yourself and why
Yeah.
you're here, please.
Just a quick note to Clara. How many tabs do you have open, Clara, on your computer?
Yes, right?
Your internet is like struggling. So just wondering if
Okay,
maybe
I'm
that. My name's Sherry Suter. I live in central British Columbia in Canada. Homesteaded since 1997. Before that, I lived in Switzerland. My husband is Swiss and lived there for 11 years. I thought I might add a new dimension to my introduction. Is that okay, Teo?
Absolutely, Sherry.
One of the other faces. A long time ago, I asked myself the question, what do you believe? And I've seen that as kind of the beginning of my journey. And of course, I noticed Jordan Peterson being Canadian, actually, and seeing him in the news. That's kind of how I discovered him. And then went the regular route with Paul Vanderklay popping up constantly and me dismissing him until finally I couldn't anymore. But back to the question of what do you believe? A large part of my participation here has been a result of that question, because I find that because of the way that I've lived, very rurally and remotely and so on, my opponent processing opportunities were pretty limited. And so this gave me a place to discover who I was in reciprocal relationship with other people. And that's really been like the crux of it for me, honestly. I've wanted to learn like lots of things. There was a lot of things that I didn't know, a lot of books I had never read, and I just knew that if I plugged into a space like this, that it was going to give me lots of lots of those opportunities too. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sherry. And I appreciate the new dimension of answering that question. And I think I too will follow suit in my answering of this. My name is Tayo, also known as Teo. Either is not too fast.
Tayo.
I think one of the reasons I've ended up in this place is because I pray to end up in this place. I left a comment on the Peterson Peugeot video, literally asking where can I find people who speak like this, and a few days later, probably same day or the day after, Paul van der Clay's epic 2-part 6 hours commentary on that video came out, and I watched that, and since then I've just been sliding further and further down the TLC maze of channels. So that's partly why I ended up here. It's because of that I found out about Chad and became friends with him, and he was generous enough to invite me to Not Estuary. I also had a estuarial conversation this a few weeks ago that gave a new dimension to what I do like about estuaries, and for me, it's the meeting of the fresh water and the salt water. I enjoy the the chaos that encourages. I get too bored with the mundane, and if we're all just agreeing for agreeing's sake, I start to feel uncomfortable and might even start playing devil's advocate. So I think I really do enjoy the opponent processing that estuary affords due to the multiple perspectives.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. Remember in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show, Paul van der Clay's and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the Ortho Bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your